Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Carolyn. Welcome to the March 19th Medicine Hat Police Commission meeting. We'll open this evening with a land acknowledgement. The Medicine Hat Police Service and its Police Commission honor and acknowledge that we are situated on Treaty 7 and Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Stoney Nakoda, and Tsuut'ina, as well as the Cree, Sioux, and Saulteaux bands of the Ojibwe peoples. We also acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of Métis Nation. I would now ask any commission member present to advise the chair if they have any perceived or known conflicts of interest related to the items listed on today's agenda. Any declared conflicts will be noted in the minutes. Seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. It was circulated on Friday last week. If we have a motion to approve as presented, or is there any additions? Commissioner Sir, seconder. Commissioner Thorson, thank you. And
the agenda.
The agenda?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, no,
Yeah, agenda, thank you. Any further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, anybody abstained? Opposed? Motion is carried. Our agenda is approved. With that, we'll move on to the minutes. Those were also circulated on Friday. We motion to approve and or amend. Commissioner Keane, do you want a motion?
motion to amend.
Let's get a seconder. Get it on the table. Seconder on the minutes. Commissioner Hirsch, thank you. And Vice Chair Keane, go ahead with your amendment.
Yeah, under new business 9B, nomination for, oh, sorry, no, I stand corrected. That is correct.
Okay. Is there any other revisions on the minutes as circulated? With no amendments, the motion is to approve as presented. Anybody abstained? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Chief, we have a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Constable Dave Smith from our MHPS traffic section. Recently, in the last couple of months, commission members had some questions about impaired driving and different things that are done, and we thought it was a great opportunity to bring Dave forward and tell you all about it. So I'll have Dave take it away.
Previously to December 18th, 2018, an officer would conduct a vehicle stop or attend to a complaint and have to form suspicion that a driver was operating a motor vehicle with alcohol in their body. So some of the ways that they would do this, the most common ways, if they observed the odor of beverage alcohol on their breath, or if the driver actually told them they were drinking. So in that case, an officer would have to make a screening demand, use a screening device to confirm the levels of alcohol and if they were above or below the prohibited levels. And at that point, if they were above the levels, the driver would be arrested, chartered, cautioned, and taken into the police station for further evidentiary samples, which are commonly referred to as a breathalyzer. So currently we use a breathalyzer called Intox ECR2. For that type of criminal investigation, you would require a minimum of 2 officers. One would be the primary investigator, one would be the breath technician or the qualified breath technician. Depending where the vehicle stop was conducted, a third may be required to facilitate the vehicle seizure. Because you can't, if the vehicle's in the middle of a highway, roadway, creating a hazard, you would have to have another member attend to remove the vehicle and that potential safety issue. So in December 18th, 2018, there was some legislation changes to the criminal code and the way the investigations took place. For example, it was established that driving was no longer, like it wasn't a right, it was actually established it was a privilege. So with that, they come up with mandatory alcohol screening. So as long as an officer conducting a vehicle stop for whatever reason, vehicle equipment regulations, document check, if an officer had on their person a roadside screening device, they would make a mandatory alcohol screening. And that was deemed a very, very small intrusion for a breath sample because of the severity and safety issues to the general public. So it ended up passing, and on December 18th, it came into effect. So when an officer conducts a vehicle stop and they have a roadside screening device on them, they make a mandatory alcohol screening demand. And then they would go on from those whatever the results of that screening were. They wouldn't have to form the suspicion that the driver had alcohol in the system now. With that, it did somewhat shorten the investigation a little bit because there was no more building the suspicion or whatnot. And that's the way it was for approximately 2 years when the investigations were still criminal in nature. There were still breath samples required. And then the Alberta Transportation came out with the Justice Transformation Initiative. So in 2020, what they did was they come up with a new framework similar to that of British Columbia. Previously, there was always some kind of license suspension, vehicle seizure, which would accompany a criminal charge investigation. So in 2020, when Alberta Transportation changed it, what they did was gave officers the discretion to, rather than conducting a criminal investigation, laying criminal charges, there was framework created so that a impaired driving investigation and sanctions could be issued without criminal charges, and that way it could you could avoid jail time or whatnot. So, example, if somebody is under an investigation for a criminal driving offense, and it's a first-time offense, no previous history, there's no aggravating factors, which we'll get into a little later, then an officer has discretion just to issue what's called a provincial sanction. And we will get into that in the next couple slides here. So with that, Alberta Transportation couldn't just come out and make their own thing. They actually had to create an act to govern the legislation and the process of doing so, which they come up with the Provincial Administrative Penalties Act, or PAPA for short. So it would end up governing and strengthening some of the sanctions that impaired driving would consist of. So for example, previously a fail on a roadside screening device might be a vehicle seizure and a license suspension for a certain amount of days. With the new legislation, there was fines placed with it as well, creating these sanctions. That way, if there was no criminal charge associated to it, it still had sanctions issued, which would be fines associated to it, and the driver may be required to take driving courses or educational courses with regards to that and impaired driving. So to facilitate all these process changes, they come up with immediate roadside sanction and a website called Safe Roads. So now, and as technology increases, the sanctions would be administered and entered onto a website, Alberta Transportation website, called Safe Roads. So an officer roadside on the computer in his vehicle can enter the information for impaired driving and issue all the sanctions right there. The investigative process didn't change. So it would still involve a valid vehicle stop, whether it be for vehicle equipment stuff, a violation of Traffic Safety Act, checking documents or whatnot, or public complaint. An officer would still either have to do the roadside screening if they didn't have a roadside on them, or they can conduct mandatory alcohol screening, and then they would go up, and as a result of the screening or mandatory alcohol screening, they would form their grounds to believe that a driver was impaired by alcohol and or drug, and would still have to come to the same reasonable grounds that somebody was operating while impaired. One of the steps that changed was what to do after that. So they don't automatically have to arrest, charter, caution, bring them to the police station for evidentiary samples. If it is, for example, a first-time offense, there's no aggravating factors, the officer has the discretion to release on a roadside screening sanction or immediate roadside sanction. There's no new limits, so all the limits that were previous set by the province for years have always been the same, and the police don't have any new powers. So they all they get is the discretion to not lay a criminal charge and just rely on the provincial sanctions. So, as I mentioned, Safe Roads, the officer can upload it onto a provincial website, and all the information, all the officer's notes, any evidence that he has would be uploaded to this, or she has, would be entered into this website. The subject receiving these sanctions, the recipient, could actually go onto his or her phone, onto Safe Roads, and actually look at all the sanctions, the information, the officer's notes, everything right there, and then almost immediately. They can also do it at home on their computer if they get home and log in and they put in their what's called a contravention number or their file number, and they can bring up all that information as well. So with that, they do have some sanctions, which will be a fine amount, license suspension, vehicle seizures, which would differ from whatever sanction they had received, whether it's an impaired driving or if it's a new driver and it detected alcohol or a drug in their system, they too would receive sanctions. So some of the screening tools that we do have, one is an approved screening device. So an approved screening device refers to a roadside screening device for alcohol, something we would always use for a long time, and we use with mandatory alcohol screening. So the other would be a approved drug screening equipment. So the approved drug screening equipment, it's a little cumbersome. It's bigger than a roadside screening device. I'm not going to fit it in my pocket, but what it does is detects the presence of drugs. So for example, it'll test right now for the presence of THC or cocaine. The other tools that we have is what's called a standardized field sobriety test. What this is, there's officers trained in a technique or detection method for screening, which consists of 3 tests. So if anybody's ever see a police show where they see an officer doing like an eye test and they have a finger going back and forth, that's what that would be. So there's 3 tests associated to it. We'll be checking the eyes. One would consist like a test you would see of them walking the line, and then the other is a one-leg stand test. So what that is, it's a psychophysical test where they would test the recipient's ability to basically perform physical coordination tests while being directed to do so with specific instructions, which would divide the attention of the subject to see if they could do the test or whatnot. If they fail 2 out of 3 of those tests, they would be deemed impaired to go for further evidentiary tests. The other evidentiary test we have for alcohol would be an approved instrument, commonly referred to as a breathalyzer. This is an instrument which is relied on for specific results. So roadside screening, if the person is impaired, they'll only see a fail, which indicates a blood alcohol concentration above the prohibited limit. We don't know what level they're at. They could be at that limit or higher. If it is if evidentiary samples are required, this is the instrument that would prove or provide what number they're at. The other is a drug recognition expert. So if a driver did fail the standardized field sobriety test and further testing was required, they would be brought down to a drug recognition expert who would then conduct an evaluation of further testing. So it's a process that it takes about an hour, give or take, depending on what drug a person may or may not be on. And then with that, if a DRE or drug recognition expert deems impairment, they would make a bodily substance demand, like a urine demand or blood demand, which would be sent away to a lab to confirm the call, the DRE kind of thing. And then we still have the option, as we always did, of obtaining blood samples, where somebody would be taken to the hospital and to a blood tech, and where somebody would draw blood for analysis to go to a lab. So, as I mentioned, the sanctions, there have always been some sort of sanctions. For example, new drivers, GDL drivers, probationary drivers, they cannot operate a motor vehicle or conveyance with any alcohol or drug in their system. And there was always some kind of consequence to that. So with the new sanctions, they call it an IRS novice. So they would receive a license suspension, a vehicle seizure, and a fine amount. They would also may be required to take a course to educate them on the importance of driving and driving sober kind of thing. One of the other sanctions that came out was commercial drivers. So this is new to me, and it was, when it came into force, a commercial driver operating a heavy, say, semi-truck, for instance, also has to have zero alcohol, zero drugs in their system. If they are found to have any alcohol or drugs in their system, they too would be given sanctions for operating that way. That one doesn't include a vehicle seizure, but it does include a vehicle or a license suspension with a fine amount. The Warren, again, most provinces and territories have provincial sanctions that would start at the 0.05 level. You've probably heard that. What that is a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05, between 0.05 and 0.08. 0.08 being the criminal level. A lot of provinces and territories have their own sanctions that they would issue this. So if a driver blew between 0.05 and 0.08, they would be issued a sanction, which usually consists for first offense, 3-day vehicle seizure, 3-day license suspension. It also has a fine amount, and they may be required to take a course as well. Then we also have a fail. We've talked about that. That's the blood alcohol concentration of 80 or greater. With that, they would also receive a license suspension, vehicle seizure for first offense. Pardon me. So the first offense is a 90-day license suspension, followed by a 12-month participation in the blow box program or interlock device program. So after the 90-day license suspension, they applied to the province to have an ignition interlock device installed in their car, which they would have to be required to have for 12 months. And after that, and they would also be required to take a course. As long as all the conditions are met, they get a reinstatement for the full license. And of course, something that's always been there for officers to use as a tool and whatnot is a 24-hour suspension. So if an officer believes that somebody is maybe some kind of medical issue or a medical event, something like that, or if there's like fatigue, if you get somebody driving on the highway that's been driving for a long time, an officer can issue a 24-hour license suspension and vehicle seizure to make sure that they don't end up injuring themselves or somebody else on the roadway. So, as I mentioned earlier, we do have the discretion to just issue IRS sanctions alone, nothing criminal. So, a driver blows a fail, I would take their keys, say, you know what, I would go back, check the history, see if there's any history of impaired driving. So if it's a recidivist that's had previous IRS sanctions issued for blowing a fail or exceeding limit, or if they've had criminal convictions or whatnot, that may be an aggravating factor where I may want to consider criminal charges. Severity, if there's a collision which causes bodily harm or death, again, that would be an aggravating factor where a criminal charge would accompany the IRS sanctions. Jail, what they mean by that is if it's accompanied with other criminal charges, oftentimes they may be committing other criminal offenses while impaired. If that is the case, a criminal driving investigation could result from that as well. Aggravating factor, one of the changes that they did make in 2018 in the criminal code, 2018, was they considered a blood alcohol concentration of 160 milligram percent of blood alcohol concentration, which would be the twice legal limit. They now consider that an aggravating factor. So does the province. So with that, we could consider criminal charges as well. Youth, if somebody is driving impaired, they blow a fail on the roadside, and there's children, somebody under 16 years of age in the car, in the vehicle, that's an aggravating factor. So criminal charges would be considered for that one as well. And then the other is kind of a gray area. That's probably why it's gray in the PowerPoint. If there's other public interest issues, so say if it's not a major collision where somebody's seriously hurt or whatnot, but it's extensive property damage, or there's some kind of incident where it would be in the public interest, where maybe criminal charges should be considered here, they still have the discretion where they can do it with that as well. So with every presentation, stats are always a kind of a cool thing to see the trends. So I put up some stats from 2021 to present, and the beige line there where you see, that'll be the IRS fails that were issued, provincial sanctions only. Well, I shouldn't say only, that the provincial sanctions were issued as well. If there is a criminal charge laid, a provincial sanction accompanies it as well, because we don't want somebody charged with impaired driving, driving away the next day kind of thing. There is sanctions issued at the same time. The light green area you'll see there, what that represents is DRE evaluations. So for years, drug impaired driving has been a thing, but it's kind of it's a very intense investigative process. So there would be screening and whatnot, and then you'd have to bring somebody down for a drug screening evaluation. With that, we're kind of seeing an increase over the years with the DRE and the amount of DRE evaluations that are being conducted, the drug recognition evaluations. A lot of that it's being recognized as being there, but we also have more tools available to us, such as the approved drug screening equipment, and we have more officers trained in standard fieldized sobriety testing. So that way we have more tools available to detect the drug impaired drivers. So you can kind of see so far in 2025, we're at 23 immediate roadside sanctions issued for IRS fails, with only one criminal code charge issued with that. Previously, in previous years, you would see similar numbers, maybe 100 to whatever, I don't have the exact numbers on me right now, would be criminal files. The benefit, or one of the benefits that a lot of officers find with just issuing IRS sanctions, if it's just a first-time offense, it's streamlined, it's very time efficient. From the time I stop a vehicle, if I get a reading of a fail on a roadside from doing mass, I issue the paperwork. A driver can be on their way in 20, 25 minutes. Previously, in the criminal impaired world, if you're completing a complete impaired criminal investigation for a first-time offense, you could be there anywhere from 2 hours or longer, depending. So in 2021, 2022, you can see the increase there. 2023, it was still pretty consistent with the 200 mark. It was down a little bit in 2024, and in 2025, we're still going strong with the investigation process and tools that we're using. So the criminal investigations, you can kind of see that they sort of taper off as well. So with all these sanctions and whatnot, the drivers are responsible for the vehicle seizures, the vehicle tows. So the province was really harping on education and consequences to deter impaired driving to begin with. So that is my contact information. If you need it, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I will try to get whatever information that you may or may not require right away. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Constable Smith. On behalf of the commission, any questions? Commissioner Thorson?
Yeah, in terms of being certified for breathalyzer and DRE, what procedure does the Medicine Police Service use to get people certified?
To be a qualified breath technician, it's a course about 4 or 5 days long, where generally we go to Edmonton, Alberta, to get certified to be a qualified breath technician. With that, it's a designation by the governor, and it's which we have to wait for our certification before we can start exercising our training to be a breath tech. To be a drug recognition expert is a lot more intensive course. I myself am a trained drug recognition expert. A lot of those DRE or drug recognition evaluations that you see there, I've done a lot myself. So I've taken my course in 2019. The first portion, because it's broken up into 2 portions, was in Calgary with the Calgary Police Service and the RCMP. So that course is a 2-week course. It's where you're studying a lot of the effects that drugs have on the body, different types of drugs and stuff like that. The 3rd week, or the second portion, for my training, I actually went to Jacksonville, Florida. We actually did live evaluations with people that were actually under the influence of drugs, different kinds of drugs. And then we would have to go through these evaluations. And it would be marked by an instructor, a supervisor, and it would have to be basically marked correctly, and we would have to make a category drug call. So what I mean by that is when a drug recognition evaluation is conducted, a DRE isn't going to tell you the exact drug that somebody is under the influence of. The drugs are actually broken down into 7 categories. So the DRE, or drug recognition expert, determines the category of drug that somebody may or may not be under the influence of. So that second portion is a week long, and we had to get done about, I got 13 evaluations done there. I was brand new at it. The evaluations could take anywhere from an hour to hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, and then would come the report writing, and the report writing is pretty extensive. When the 2-week portion first, the second portion is completed, then there's an exam. It's the longest exam I've ever written in my life. I don't write as fast as I talk, and I've been really concentrating to slow down here. I was writing that exam for 11 hours. So for 11 hours, I was stuck in a room, and we were told to take water and snacks with us. Had I known I'd be there for 11 hours, I would take a lot more snacks. After the exam, then you go into an interview, a panel interview process, where if there's anything that you didn't quite, if there's any clarification needed on the exam, you would have to explain it in front of an interview. I wasn't the last one to finish writing that exam, but so it's a pretty intense course.
Vice Chair Keen.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Constable Smith, for your presentation. Appreciate it. I have 2 questions. The first one is in your presentation, you mentioned that it could, the start is a valid stop, and then it sort of progressed from there. And I guess my question, I think I know the answer, but would like to hear from you about check stops. So is that something that where anyone can just, a breath sample could be demanded from anyone going through a check stop?
Yes, sir. So there is case law that supports sobriety at a stop or check stop. And so an officer does have the authority under common law to check for that sobriety under that common law at a check stop. There's also, under the Traffic Safety Act, we can basically stop a vehicle for 5 things. One is to check for driver's license, check for vehicle registration, vehicle insurance, the mechanical condition of the vehicle to make sure it's safe to be on the road, and sobriety.
Okay, thank you. Second question is, and you may have mentioned this and I might have missed it, but currently the number of drug recognition experts with the service.
So we have 3 drug recognition experts within the service. Last year, we had 20 DRE evaluations or drug recognition expert evaluations. There's another constable in the traffic unit with me who is DRE certified now, so it helps take the load off. The first DRE drug recognition expert we had trained was a constable who ended up getting promoted to sergeant. And so the availability isn't, so Constable White and myself in the traffic unit, we are available pretty quick, pretty readily available. So we get the majority of the drug recognition expert calls. Last year I had 16 drug recognition evaluations. Constable Whiten, who ended up getting trained in November and was certified near the end of November, he ended up having 4 from the end of November and December.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Johnson?
Sort of in a larger scope from your life, but I'm sure you'll know the answer to this.
I'll try my best.
And just so other commission members know, for crash investigation, could you maybe tell us a little bit on the training that's required so that there's an understanding of how well you guys are trained between a level 2 traffic investigator, a level 3, a level 4 reconstructionist, and a level 3, just where you have to go to get that training, and just so there's some understanding of that.
Yes, sir. Good question. So we start off basically at the basics. At the bottom is a collision level 1, where an officer gets their basic introduction to collisions and motor vehicle collisions. What that is basically scene assessment and what is required for a collision, like documents, damage, what's required as a reportable collision, just your basic kind of introduction to collisions so that an officer can conduct a basic collision investigation on scene. From that, there's a collision level 2, which brings it up a notch to where they look for road evidence, vehicle debris, but also skid marks and the way tires will have an effect on the road. And with that, they're trained to actually get measurements from those skid marks to determine a basic range of speed from a collision there. Collision level 3 would be a collision analyst. Myself, I have level 3. I ended up going to Northwestern University in Illinois, just down by Chicago. If you ever wondered or heard the stories of high school kids in math, when am I ever going to use this? That is when you're going to use that, and I really wish somebody would have told me because I would have paid a lot more attention. That is a lot of math, and what we do there is we take stuff like, say, vehicle weight, vehicle dynamics. We take the coefficient of friction of the road, and what that is, different surfaces have a different friction factor. So we take all those factors into consideration, and we do a lot more math to determine a more accurate speed range of what a vehicle may have been doing at the time for speed range. It's also a great introduction to technology. As we know, vehicles change all the time. The technology nowadays it's amazing to see what they're coming with just like from week to week to week. With that, you get a introduction into vehicle electronics, so like vehicle computers, and that way you know what data is stored in a computer, and that you may want to consider taking a computer out of a vehicle to send it away for analysis to get that information. Level 4, I don't have my level 4 reconstructionist. There are plans to look for training for level 4. I can't speak personally what is involved in that training. It is more extensive than the math from level 3. Some of the officers I've talked to that have level 4 say it's more of an engineer background-based training, so it's pretty intense as well. So with that, there are specialty courses. So with those, they're your level analyst reconstruction courses. Then there's investigation courses for pedestrians. So pedestrians are going to react differently than vehicles when they get hit by a car. There's a complete different course and investigation technique for when a pedestrian or a cyclist gets hit by a car. So then you take a different measurements and different calculations again. And then there's motorcycles. Motorcycles handle differently than four-wheeled vehicles. There's a specialty course for that one as well. And then there's another one, which I have those two previous mentions ones, and another one, occupant kinematics. It sounds, it was a really interesting course to take. What it is the study of a passenger inside of a vehicle that's involved in a collision. So just like vehicles react different ways in collisions, so do passengers. So with that, we take into consideration stuff like seatbelts, damage to seatbelts, airbags, all that, and the measurements from the driver, from the distance from the driver to the dash, and all that. And there's formulas to determine a generalized speed or minimized speed that would be involved in that collision, depending on the injuries and such. So it's a pretty fascinating course. Thank you for that question. It's great. Yes, sir.
Is it safe to say that at a fatal crash, and we get fatal crashes, that in a perfect world, you'll want a level 3 or a level 4 heading that investigation because they can give opinionated evidence? Is that still the way it is?
Yes, sir. So for last year, we did end up having some serious collisions in MVCs. It was level 3 and level 4 officers that were involved in those investigations. Ideally, you would want somebody, the more training, the better, always. So if we would always want that option for sure. There is a big difference in training between level 2 and level 3 in the analyst. So it's definitely a great asset to have on a scene for sure.
I hope you don't mind. I hope the chair doesn't mind. Just one thing that I'd like to tell my fellow commission members. A friend of mine was a commissioned officer in another major police department in Western Canada, and they have a policy that if you haven't been a level 3 or a level 4 traffic man, you are never going to homicide, which is the real pinnacle of investigation. So I just, congratulations on the amount of effort that you guys put towards your education, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any other questions from the commission? Chief, anything to add?
I just want to say thanks very much to Constable Smith for his presentation. Dave, you got a wealth of knowledge and you're very passionate about the subject, so thank you. Although it sounds very business-like when Dave presents it, what I will tell to the commission and any of the public that are watching or listening is that Commissioner Johnson alluded to it. We had a number of serious collisions in our city in 2024 and 2 fatalities. And the reality is that serious events for the families that lose loved ones in these events. But I'll tell you, for guys like Dave and his coworkers in traffic and frontline police officers that have to go and investigate them, for the fire department, for EMS that has to go to these events, although it seems very business-like here when you just see a presentation, there's the human side of it. It takes a toll. The work that Dave and his coworkers do and the frontline officers that protect that scene over a number of hours and then days that go into the work to investigate it properly, I think that takes a real toll on people that people forget, because that's the work after, long after people have forgotten about it. So I just want to say thanks to Dave and your team, highly professional, do a great job for the service in our city. So thank you very much, and to all first responders that deal with these things, because it's serious and having it done right is very important to the families. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Constable Smith. On behalf of the commission, we appreciate the presentation. Just to echo what the chief said, you know, obviously a highly sensitive and community impact work that you do, and we appreciate your efforts and you taking the time to be with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
With that, we'll move on to item number 7, which is standing items. Police budget update, Chief Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're projecting a negative variance at year end at this point, and it's around the vacancy adjustment, but we'll report back throughout the year on it and hopefully correct that as the year goes on, but more to come on that.
Thank you, Chief. And Commissioner Johnson, AAPBGG report.
The only thing that I have is to tell the commission that there is a chance that I will not be able to go to the meeting in Westlock. I won't know, and I'll know a little bit more on the 16th. I've been in touch with the APG about it. I asked if there was any meetings that I would need to go to as a board member, and if someone from here could take my place, and I was told there's not. They can't. So I'll know on the 16th.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. If you could keep us updated, that would be great, including keep Mel in the loop so she can communicate on your behalf if you need any assistance with that. Thank you. Item number 8, Office of the Chief report.
I'll turn it over to Inspector Graham for the operational services report.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Commission members. I'm going to highlight 2 incidents on your report and turn your attention to page 10. On February 2nd, a search warrant was executed in the residence of the 900 block of 5th Street Southeast, where police recovered 2 restricted firearms, Canadian currency, and several controlled drugs, including cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, and GHB. As a result of this investigation, a 43-year-old male and a 42-year-old female were charged with possession of a substance for the purpose of trafficking, possessions of property obtained by crime, unauthorized possession of a firearm, unsafe storage of a firearm, and possession of a weapon obtained by the commission of an offense. Additionally, the male was charged with breaching his probation. Next, I'll have you turn your attention to page 11. The school resource team conducted a suppression project focused on education, direct engagement with parents and students, and intelligence gathering related to multiple use posting concerning content online, including images of drugs, firearms, and other weapons. This was a proactive project which was successful in resulting in numerous contacts with the youth and the parents, the seizure of multiple weapons, and intelligence was gathered which then assisted the criminal investigation section in obtaining a search warrant. This led to charges and additional weapons seized from the two high-risk youths. Again, I'd like to highlight that this was a self-generated project from our school resource officers, and it also demonstrates the work that they're doing, not only in their schools, but identifying issues that are out of their schools that have a direct impact within the schools. So I'm very, very impressed with the work that they did there. And that concludes my report. If I take any questions, if you have any.
Any questions for Inspector Graham? Seeing none, Chief, we'll move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it over to Inspector West for Investigation and Support Services report.
Thank you, Chief. Just a couple of things. On page 14, I'll just turn your attention to the criminal investigation section, particularly the major crimes unit. So we had a really good file involving some youth. So we have a really great intel person that works behind the scene, our criminal analyst. And but we did have information that some youths were in possession of a .22 rifle and various other firearms and conducting criminal activities with them. MCU launched an investigation and gathered enough grounds for a search warrant that was executed as a residence. And as a result, the seizure of a sawed-off shotgun, a defaced Ruger rifle, live ammunition, a replica handgun, bear spray, and machete. So 7 various types of weapons there. As a result, there were 4 youths were charged with several criminal offenses, including assault with a weapon, possession of prohibited weapon, and all those related firearms charges. 2 of the youths were remanded into provincial youth custody, and 2 youths were released into the community with conditions. So just a really good file, and it just goes to show that the seriousness of youth crime, and that our criminal investigation section takes it very serious when the offenses dictate, for sure. On the following page 15, just turning your attention to organized crime section, the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, so our alert team, again, closed out a really good file, and in my mind, a file that was a major public safety factor. So in late 2024, alert gathered enough information to begin an investigation with regard to a offender out of Calgary that was coming into community selling drugs, and we knew that was armed with firearms. On February 28th, so they went through the investigation, and with the help of our partner agencies in Calgary and Brooks, we managed to close the investigation. A 28-year-old man from Calgary was arrested on the highway, again with the help of our partners, the RCMP and the Calgary Police Service, with some of the intelligence and work that happened in Calgary. But he was coming into community when they arrested him, traveling from Calgary to Medicine Hat. Search warrants, so there was the search of the vehicle, there was also the team had identified another location in Medicine Hat, so search warrant was conducted on the vehicle and our residents here in town as well. And as a result, a local person was charged with numerous drug offenses, and our primary target was arrested as well. When they took the vehicle, when they made the arrest on the highway, it was via traffic stop. That offender was in the vehicle by himself and had a loaded Glock pistol with him. So just a really good file. We had that person coming into community, using violence to conduct drug business, so a really important file. So all in all, 1,000 grams of methamphetamine were seized, along with 493 grams of cocaine, 330 grams of fentanyl, hydromorphine, the loaded handgun, and almost $35,000 in Canadian currency. So a really good file, and I know some of our files lead on to they sort of lead up to Calgary, and we get bigger fish up there, but this was a big fish in Medicine Hat that we were able to put behind bars temporarily. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Inspector West. Any questions for Inspector West? Commissioner, sir?
Just a question on that. I noticed, just prior to what you were talking about there, Inspector West, that there's a new forensic identification unit. And I just wondering, like, was there an older vehicle that was traded in or whatever? You must have had to re-outfit something like this. And my next question would be, is that taken to every call where there's a drug deal going down where they would look for fingerprints, et cetera, or?
Yeah, that falls over to Inspector Graham's division, so I'll maybe have
okay.
him, he did a lot of work on that,
Okay.
I'll tell you that.
Thanks for the question. This van was several years in the making to get the van back ordered. It's not your typical van. I believe we ordered it 2 years ago and finally took possession of it a month or so ago. And it took some time to outfit it, but it did replace an old existing van that we had for a forensic identification unit. And this van will be utilized for all crime scenes that whatever it may be, whether it's a drug-related crime scene, anything that needs forensics. It's outfitted with basically everything they need inside the van to conduct their work on site, as opposed to having to bring everything back to the police station. And it could be there for several hours to several days.
Yeah. I couldn't remember seeing that in the budget, the current budget, so I'm assuming that's been funded from prior years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, sir, I can tell you that when I was a real cop a long time ago, and I was in the forensic unit, and we worked in minivans, which we still have one of, and it's horrendous trying to do the work and deal with exhibits and make notes when you're sitting in a seated position in a minivan. And this new van that we have, the members are able to stand up in the back there because of the height. They have a computer back there they can work on. They have equipment drawers. It's very well organized, and it's the level that we actually should have had in this city for a while through no one's fault. Amazon bought up all the vans in North America, which is why they were all back ordered and no one could get them. So, and the one we waited for is a Ford model that has all-wheel drive, which is important for our climate here and for the hills we have. The other versions that people were able to get were two-wheel drives, which in our climate at some points won't work out well. So this was a long time coming. It's great for the unit, and as someone who has done it the other way, I can tell you it's incredible to have that piece of equipment here, just to make it that much easier and that much more professional.
Just a follow-up question there with a vehicle like that and the equipment that's in there. Again, it's the training of the men as there's multiple people, or training of the police officers. Is there multiple people trained to run that unit?
They're already trained. We have 4 people that work in that unit and a sergeant, so they already have the forensic training. So there's no new training. They just have to get used to using a new vehicle. Other than that, there's no new training involved. It just helps their efforts at major crime scenes, any crime scene for that matter, especially at major crime scenes. It makes it a lot more professional, but they're all equipped to use it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll just circle back to questions for Inspector West. Seeing none, we'll move on to the chief's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to thank Jason and Joe for their work that their divisions do, overseen by Deputy Chief Saini. Just want to offer Deputy Chief Saini the opportunity if there's anything he'd like to add that hasn't been added already.
I don't have anything to add. I just wanted to make a statement, which I did today in morning briefing, that the work that's going on in the last 3 months that I've seen is at a pace that I've never seen in my career. From all the members, from all the sections and all the units, very progressive. And sometimes when you're in it, you don't realize how you're moving and how progressive we are. Overall, like both Inspector West and Inspector Graham are pivotal in that, and it's great to see how progressive we are here. It's positive. So that's the 2 cents I want to say. Thank you.
And I'll just add to that, that this is the first time since I've been in Medicine Hat that we've had a full team in our office. And you don't realize what you don't have and what you're missing till you have it again. And it's an incredible amount of work that the 5 of us are able to push through. And it's incredible what you can get done when you have the full team. And it's a lot, I can tell you, for all 5 of us, it's so nice to go home every knowing what you're, it's a lot of work, but what you're able to push and what you're gonna push the next day again as a full team, it's incredible. So I'm very thankful to have the full team now. It's great. In terms of the Office of the Chief report, I won't elaborate on anything. What we try to do is highlight the events that all of us are a part of, and we certainly don't put all of them in, but if there's anything, any of the items or events you want to ask a question about, by all means, feel free, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chief Murphy. Any questions for the chief? Seeing none, we received no new business for this month's meeting, and we have no one in the gallery, so we'll move beyond the community consultation as well. We have upcoming meetings on Wednesday, April 16th in council chambers and Wednesday, May 21st in council chambers. Motion to adjourn. Commissioner Johnson. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for everybody online watching. We appreciate you checking this out. Thanks.